You've probably noticed that the academy sucks. It is a sad reality of our time. But, rather than sinking into despair, let's take a historical perspective and ask ourselves why this is happening, and why now, and, perhaps, is there a way in which the academy can be saved? The root of the problem, I think you'll agree, is the human sciences. They have been on the decline for a while, and are drawing a decreasing number of students. Some people think that the human sciences should be abolished altogether, others just wait for them to die. The problem is, the decay and corruption of the human sciences is affecting academia as a whole, creating an atmosphere that is not conducive to scholarly work. Let's focus on the human sciences, and ask why they are in such a sorry state. The human sciences are a relatively new phenomenon. Until the end of the 18th century, Western culture believed that man should act according to God's will, in order to reach heaven in the afterlife. They used to believe that revelation gives us God's word, and we should follow the teachings of the Church. In the Age of Enlightenment, the 17th and 18th centuries, the belief was that human reason is capable of figuring out God's divine plan, and live according to it, achieving a good life on earth as well. Scholars studied nature, believing it contains clues to the divine plan. Man himself was not seen as a thing worthy of studying. But at the end of the 18th century, the idea of progress entered European thought. The idea was that man is a being that is progressing through history, advancing towards self-perfection. The idea that we can know what God wants, or that God exists at all, was shaken. Man became the main object of study. We should understand what is meant by the concept of man. The belief was that human nature is universal. That is, that there are parts of us, for instance reason, that are shared by all humans. Humans also have many traits that are not universal, and the unique combination of these traits in each of us is what determines our individuality. Man was the word that was used to describe the universal part, and the goal was to flesh him out. That is, to figure out what the universal parts are. The belief was that once we fully understand man, we will be able to create the perfect human society. In such a society, we will all live by our shared universal traits, and every individual will also be able to express their particular traits. Instead of reaching heaven in the afterlife, then, the modern age was about creating heaven on earth. It was part of what today we call the meta-narrative of the modern age. In the 19th century, the main human sciences were fields that came out of the sciences that already existed, but were previously focused on nature. Now, the focus shifted towards man, and the progress of man, achieved through his growing mastery of nature, both around him and within him. History used to be just a description of past events. Now, these events were strung together to create narratives about the advancement of man. Biology used to just classify animals and plants. Now, it became the story of the evolution of nature towards man, the highest organism, and asked how this organism could be perfected. Economics used to be about the price of goods. Now, it became a science of how man turns nature into products, and human labor became the determinant of their value. Philology used to believe that language was handed down to humans by God, and was corrupted through time. Now, it became the story of how languages evolved in the process of man's greater understanding of nature. And the century also saw the emergence of new fields of exploration that were focused solely on man, like psychology, sociology, anthropology, and criminology. By the beginning of the 20th century, they were established scientific fields. If you read books of scholars working in the human sciences during the modern age, from the late 18th century to the mid-1960s, you will find more than science. It was usually couched in discussions of what this teaches us about man, and how this could be helpful in our quest after the perfect society. As a result, the leading historians, biologists, economists, philologists, psychologists, sociologists, and anthropologists became culture heroes, paving the way before humankind. Students who went to study these fields were often driven by ideological motives, dreaming of becoming such heroes. But then, tragedy struck the human sciences, and that tragedy is what is known as the death of man. The idea that man is advancing towards perfection, or even that there is such a thing as a universal man, crumbled completely by the 1960s. This realization is one of the main things that brought the demise of the modern age as a whole. The prophet of the death of man is, you guessed it, Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche famously said that God is dead, but what he said about the implications of this death is a little less known. One of them is the realization that since God is dead, the entire basis for the modern concept of man has been taken away. The modern age rebelled against religion, replacing heaven in the afterlife with heaven on earth, once man finishes his growth towards self-perfection. This was seen as the end point of history, the culmination of all these historical and biological processes. But what is the basis to surmise that the perfection of man is the end point of history, or even that such perfection is possible at all? If you dig into its origins, you realize that this belief is based on one thing, and one thing alone: the idea that man is the crown of creation. This belief, however, is predicated on the existence of God, and once we killed God, that is, once we stopped believing in him, we lost any grounds to believe in the possibility of the perfection of man. Furthermore, Nietzsche argued that human culture, and even human nature, are too polluted by centuries in which humans believe that they are fallen creatures. It is so polluted that man cannot possibly be perfected, and is incapable of creating a good society. If we truly want to create a better society, said Nietzsche, we must start thinking beyond man. And, indeed, pop culture immediately started to think beyond man. Nietzsche put forth these ideas in the 1880s, and in the 1890s we already get the first crop of pop creations imagining it. Some of them were directly influenced by Nietzsche, some simply because this was a zeitgeist. You don't see it before that. Frankenstein, for instance, is a book that came before, in which you can say that there is an attempt to go beyond man. But Dr. Frankenstein is merely trying to create a perfect man, and his failure produces a monster. The monster then realizes that man is the crown of creation, and that he wants to be like that, but he could never achieve it because he is a monster. In the 1890s popular books, on the other hand, we see a different picture. Dracula is a creature that was once human and then went beyond, and he has no wish to return. The aliens in War of the Worlds are intelligent non-humans that are superior to man, and what defeats them and saves humankind has nothing to do with man. And the scientific abominations in the island of Dr. Moreau hint at a future in which man's beastly nature will take over. These are negative versions of going beyond man. But then came the 20th century, with its superheroes, mutants, androids, higher species, and so forth. As always, then, pop culture was a thing that expressed the new sensibilities, while the Academy lagged behind. The Academy is always decades behind the zeitgeist. You might say, hang on, isn't Nietzsche an academic figure? No, Nietzsche was completely misunderstood by the Academy, and was regarded as a weirdo by the scholars of his time. It was pop culture that embraced Nietzsche and ran with him. This is what I'm trying to tell you. Nietzsche invented everything. He even invented the word superhero. He even came up with the idea of wearing dark sunglasses to be cool, decades before sunglasses or cool were even invented. By the 1960s, the news about the death of man finally reached the Academy as well. And that caused a problem for the human sciences. If we no longer believe in the progress of man through history, if we no longer think that there is such a thing as universal man, if we no longer strive to perfect man, what is the point of exploring him? The older fields simply moved away from man. Biology now focuses not on man as the hero of the evolutionary drama, but on the genes. Man is considered to be an organism that certain genes created in order to increase their chances of survival. Economists no longer believe that the labor of man is the measure that determines the value of a product, but focus on the forces of the market as a determinator. This is why economics is considered a right-wing field nowadays, and left-wing economists are desperately trying to bring man back into the equation. But since man is dead, news that apparently did not reach their ears, they don't stand much of a chance. What about the newer, modern fields, those that made the human spirit their main object of exploration? They could not detach from man so easily. Where could they go? Well, there was stuff to be done in deconstructing the idea of man itself, because this idea was constructed around the European white male, and was thus biased against other groups. Since the modern belief was that man is universal, that we are all the same, how do we account for the differences between cultures? The modern answer was that the white man is more advanced, while other cultures are simply behind in their advancement. This led to phenomena like colonialism and racial discrimination. After the death of man, this belief started to be criticized, and cultural relativism became the new progressive idea. Similarly, since the perfect society was seen as one where everyone would healthily procreate, universal man was seen as straight, and those who had a different type of sexuality were seen as deviants, meaning those who deviate from the progress towards the perfect society, or even as perverts, those who pervert the course of our progress and put it at risk. This led to the suppression of sexual minorities. After the death of man, the belief is that everyone should be allowed to live according to their own sexuality, because this is what will make them happy. In pop culture, this rebellion against the oppressive idea of man started in the 1920s. By the 1970s, it reached the academy, and gave psychologists, sociologists, anthropologists, criminologists, and historians a lot to do in trying to clean our thought of all the biased ideas that were connected to the concept of man, and put other groups on the same level as straight white males. Thus, those working in these fields could still feel like heroes, creating a better world. Alas, by the 1990s, the work was essentially done. Even the general public, by now, no longer believed that the straight white male was superior in any way. What could the human sciences do now? Well, one solution was to go fully scientific, and connect your research with the new findings in fields like genetics, neuroscience, and cybernetics, or use the new computer technology for comparative studies. Some do it, and sometimes achieve interesting results. But then you are not changing the world. Remember, a lot of people who go into these fields are driven by an ideology, and want to help advance man. They are still enamored by the image that the human sciences had in the modern age. To maintain that ideal, you can't go fully scientific. You need to find a way to express the alleged struggles of the human spirit, and to fight for it. And so we get this abomination, this unholy mix between modern and postmodern ideas, that claims that humankind can be brought to perfection, and the one thing that prevents it from achieving perfection is, well, the straight white male. Instead of regarding what happened in the modern age as merely a historical phase we grew out of, the bad sides of that age are now being portrayed as intrinsic to the nature of the white man. There is a great deal of ignorance about history pervading human sciences right now, and it seems that the only thing they know is that the white man imposed concepts on the rest of us, concepts that ensured his continuous domination. The conclusion is that since the human mind can be manipulated in such a way, all we need to do to liberate it is to free it from these bad concepts. Thus, the main thing they do is invent new concepts, and then try to impose them on everyone else. It led to what is called cancel culture, terrorizing the campuses and eliminating anyone guilty of wrongthink. It happens mainly in the human sciences, but it infects other fields as well. How do we overcome this? Well, once again, pop culture has to come to the rescue. Pop culture is now about social networks, about internet memes, about video games, about fantasy literature, about imagining new universes. Our idea of what it is to be human is being transformed in these mediums, in which we function as a crossroad in a global network of information, in which we daily interact with artificial intelligence, in which we constantly adopt new identities, in which we multitask our brains into multi-personalities. There is a vast field of possibilities to be explored here by the human sciences, if they just get their head out of their ass. I believe that new scientific fields, more in tune with this reality, will eventually emerge and replace the old irrelevant fields. Until then, we'll just have to ignore most of what comes out of the academy. The best knowledge, as we all know, exists elsewhere.